From our State House studio in Montgomery, I'm Todd Stacy. Welcome to Capitol Journal. The small East Alabama town of Dadeville, and indeed the whole state, is in mourning tonight as the names emerged of the 4 young people who were shot and killed during a Sweet 16 birthday party Saturday night. Those who were confirmed killed in the mass shooting were Siah Collins, a 19-year-old from Opelika, Corbin Holston, a 23-year-old from Dadeville, Kiki Smith, a 17-year-old from Dadeville, and Phil Dowdle, an 18-year-old from Camp Hill, who is set to play college football for Jacksonville State later this year. There were at least 32 other people injured from the shooting, according to the Alabama Law Enforcement Agency, though it is unclear how many of those received gunshot wounds. As of this recording, state investigators have not said whether or not they have a suspect in custody or wanted. And one other update from Aaliyah, officials say that no casings of high-powered rifles have been found, leading them to believe that handguns were used in the shooting. Officials are asking people who may have knowledge about the shooting to come forward to authorities. Those who may have information are urged to call Aaliyah's Crime Information Hotline at 1-800-392-8011 or email sbi.investigations@aaliyah.gov or contact Central Alabama Crime Stoppers at 1-833-AL1-STOP or at 251stop.com. Hundreds of mourners gathered for a prayer vigil Sunday night on the streets of downtown Dadeville. Students have been in shock, comforting one another over the tragic loss of close friends. Dadeville High School students returned to class Monday, where Tallapoosa County Superintendent Raymond Porter said that counselors would be on hand. Governor Kay Ivey was speaking in the capital city today, where the Dadeville shooting was heavy on her mind and those in attendance at the Montgomery Rotary Club. Ivey offered her condolences and said it was unacceptable for such violent crime to occur in Alabama.
Priority number 1 right now is to support our law enforcement officials as they work to effectively bring anyone responsible to justice. Even in this time of healing, there is an important mission, and that absolutely must be the focus. The city of Dadeville and our beloved Alabama will persevere.
Members of the Joint Legislative Black Caucus gathered in Birmingham today for a news conference raising awareness about legislation they say could help curb gun crime in Alabama.
During that interview on Capitol Journal, just 3 days before the mass shooting in Dadeville, I said these words: I don't want the state of Alabama and Governor Ivey to have to come out after a school shooting has happened, like the governor in Tennessee, who is now saying he does support some type of red flag legislation. I went on to say, I don't want us in Alabama to have to respond to a mass shooting before we do something. But yet it happened just 3 days later, and we're standing here. We must do something. I am tired of hearing the wails and the cries of parents and families who have lost their loved ones, and elected officials have not acted. We must do something.
We have a gun problem. Alabama. No child in Alabama should be afraid of getting shot and killed at a Sweet 16 birthday party. No child should have to worry about gun violence in their schools or fear one of their classmates bringing their parents' gun on campus. No teenager in Alabama should be able to purchase an assault rifle off the streets that is designed solely to kill as many people as possible.
The Alabama Community College System is celebrating 60 years in existence. On May 3, 1963, legislation establishing what would become ACCS was signed into law, creating a unified system of institutions focused on accessible training in arts and sciences and in useful skills and trades. Today, more than 155,000 students from every walk of life receive education and training at an Alabama community or technical college.
I would put the presidents as a group in this system today up against any other community college system in the nation. We have people that are dead serious about helping everyone that we can persuade to come and seek help.
I am very grateful to have a role in which we give hope each and every day that we come to work. We put wings on students' dreams. Certainly, our community colleges are creating a highly skilled and highly educated workforce, and we are a strong economic resource for the state. We are 24 colleges, 144,000 students, and 9,700 faculty and staff that focus every day on success for our students, every day, leading to hope, opportunities, and jobs.
Ingram State, what you've done and what you're doing as the sole provider of the prison education is clear that this path forward is important. Even before the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King made the effort to change everything about the way we treat each other here in Alabama, there you were, Wallace Community College, Selma. There you were as a light, encouraging us to want more, to strive harder. There you were, Bishop State and Drake State, ensuring that those who look different are looked over, get a chance on this path forward. The Alabama Community College System, the premier workforce entity. This is the path forward.
Recently reported cost overruns on the ongoing prison construction project in Elmore County are becoming a concern to state lawmakers. Last month, the Prison Finance Authority increased the spending cap more than $350 million from $623 million to $975 million for the Elmore County project. Last week, when responding to reporters, Senate President Pro Tem Greg Reed said that even with inflation, those increases were unexpected.
What we have asked for and we've discussed related to prisons is the budget chairs have been asking for detail on the prison construction projects and those kinds of things. We're well aware that because of inflation in Alabama and other places, of course, is a real serious issue for us. So that's a topic that's difficult for us to manage at the moment because the cost of building things, especially facilities like a prison, has gone up astronomically. So that's something nobody caused, nobody created. We're just having to figure out a way to deal with it. So that's a topic we're continuing to work with the Department of Finance, the governor's staff, Department of Corrections, just so that the legislative leadership understands what's going on there. We've got to move forward with the prison program. We've made some very strong commitments to that. I think it's very important. We still are suffering from some of the lawsuits we have from the Department of Justice. So, we've got issues there we're having to manage. If there are cost overruns, that's a challenge. We're kind of trying to manage that as best we possibly can. But the idea that we've got to continue moving forward on what we're doing with the prison program is a requirement for us.
And the Alabama Legislature returns to action tomorrow for the 11th legislative day. The House convenes at 1 o'clock and the Senate comes in at 2:30. It is expected to be another 3 legislative day week. We'll be right back with Cam Ward of the Bureau of Pardons and Paroles.
You can watch past episodes of Capital Journal online at video.aptv.org. Capital Journal episodes are also available on APTV's free mobile app. You can also connect with Capital Journal and link to past episodes on Capital Journal's Facebook page. And you can listen to past episodes of Capital Journal when you're driving or on the go with Capital Journal podcasts. Keep up with what's happening with Capital Journal.
Joining me next is Cam Ward, Director of the Alabama Bureau of Pardons and Paroles. Cam, thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me on, Todd.
Well, there's a number of issues that I was hoping to get your take on, mainly dealing with legislation that's going through the legislature. One that has made it all the way through and it's sitting on the governor's desk. That is this good time legislation. Has to do with incentive time. When inmates are in jail, they can accrue for good behavior time off of their sentence is a basic way of saying it. This reforms that, really makes it more strict, and makes it to where you can lose that good time. And this is obviously as a result of that deputy getting shot and killed a year ago. What is your take on this bill? Look, it may not directly affect you at Pardons and Paroles, but certainly y'all are in the same realm, and I'm wondering what your take on this piece of legislation was.
Well, first of all, I want to say the governor had an executive order that came out before the legislature went into session, and so her leadership on this really kind of spearheaded this through, I think, the legislature. So I do commend, obviously, the governor, and I commend the legislators who sponsored and passed this. It's needed in that the fact of the matter is good time should be about one thing. Did you do good? Therefore, you have an incentive to do good and get out earlier. Mm-hmm. Or if you had bad, you don't get out early. And unfortunately, I think for a long time, the good time was always counted, but the things that happened bad, such as in the officer's case you mentioned, an escape, an assault on other officers, that didn't occur. The bad should be counted against the good. And I think the governor was correct in her leadership on it, and I'm glad to see the legislature followed her lead in passing that bill.
Yeah. And since she hasn't signed it yet, I'm curious to know.
She actually signed it on Friday.
Oh, she did?
She signed it end of last week, yes. So
I'm glad to know that. Yeah, I must have missed that. Things are going fast and furious.
It's when you have those 3-day work weeks, it flies pretty fast and furious, yeah.
Yeah. Well, the reason I was going to say that is I was curious whether she might executive amend it to be more closely aligned with her executive order, but they're pretty close in nature to begin with. But now that's law.
I think the law as it is really reflects the spirit of her executive orders, and I'm glad to see it is. Mm-hmm. I think it was a good bill, and again, I think it pretty much reflected what her intent of her executive orders were.
Yeah. There's also legislation in the body right now. There's this parole bill dealing with the board, essentially trying to put some guidelines on the board, maybe direct a little bit more on what they are able to do oversight-wise with parole decisions that come before the board. This is from Representative Chris England. I think you've seen this legislation before, even when you were a member down here. What's your take on it as director?
Well, I think I know what Chris's intentions are, and I get it. There's a concern that the board has guidelines, and do they follow the guidelines or not? Right now, they're voluntary guidelines, they're not presumptive. So I think that's what Chris is getting at. I think his intentions are good. I think at the end of the day, there's 5 or 6 moving pieces in the bill that need to be addressed as opposed to just the guidelines. There's an advisory council. I think the idea that the guidelines are bad is not the issue. I think what Representative England's probably really wanting is make sure they have to follow the guidelines. We're going to follow, and I don't work for the board as we've talked about before, but at the end of the day, everybody's going to follow whatever the law is the legislature passes. Pass what you want to pass. If it's signed by the governor, goes into law, we're going to enforce the law as it's written. I do think at the end of the day, you see a huge increase in pardons. We've had a dramatic increase in the pardons. We still have that board's still passing a very low parole rate. Mm-hmm. I don't really have a position on the bill. I think Chris has got I think there's some things in there that are pretty good. I think there's some things in there that aren't necessary. But at the end of the day, if I were him, I would break it up into multiple pieces and try to do it that way. And that way you could pass some of the good parts, and then the bad parts, you could just let go by the wayside.
Yeah, and that is good to remind people that, there is a separation between your bureau, your agency, and the actual board who votes on who gets paroled.
Yeah, we deal with you once you've already been paroled or you're on probation. 77% of our people that we oversee are on probation. Then the rest are on parole, the other 23%. However, we have 44,000 people on probation or parole that we oversee. So that's my part, and that's pretty hefty, needless to say.
That's a pretty big part. Well, speaking of that, there was this last week, this package of bills that the prosecutors, the Alabama district attorneys, number of mayors, lieutenant governor was there, having to do with crime, a crime package, if you will. One having to do with retail theft. There were a couple of gun measures in there. So, and not to get into too good of specifics, but how do packages, like when they start touching the criminal statutes and maybe impacting who goes to prison, how does that impact your agency, or maybe even when they're before being supervised?
Yeah, for us, it's going to be, of course, whatever the legislature says, we want this to be the law, the governor signs it, we're going to execute whatever the law is, regardless. The only thing I would say is, one, it's hard to argue with the fentanyl bill. I think everybody agrees. It's hard to argue with that. Retail theft. If the legislature wants to tweak the sentencing guidelines, my overarching concern from my role at Pardon Parole is this. Whatever you decide on, whatever you want to do to change the sentencing guidelines or mandatory minimums, my position is always going to be there still needs to be, however you do it, a period of supervision when you come out. What the data shows us nationwide, not just in Alabama, is that the more supervision you have when you come out of prison or you come out of jail, the better chances are that you're not going to recidivate and go back to prison. And that's my concern. There's a lot of folks who want to, what they call EOS, end of sentence people. If you end of sentence someone 10 years, you serve 10 years and you walk out the door, if you have no supervision at the end of those 10 years, you're pretty much, the odds are very good you're going to go back into prison. You're going to do something, commit a new crime. My one ask of them would be, whatever you do, whatever changes you want to make, we're going to do whatever we have to do to make it work, but we do need a period of supervision to make sure we're making sure people transition back into society better again.
Mm-hmm. Well, that was sort of the whole controversy with the releases that happened earlier this year that made big headlines and produced legislation and a lot of kind of uproar from folks in this building, because, like I said, when you talk about hundreds of inmates being released at one time, it does generate headlines and fear and stuff like that, but there was not maybe a good enough realization that that was by design. They were reaching the end of their sentence, and before they were released, you wanted to the legislature was seeking to set up that supervisory period to do exactly what you're talking about, instead of just you're turned loose and you're left up to your own devices.
Yeah, and the legislature did something really good with that supervision, and that is they said you will electronically monitor them. So far today, I think we're at 835 people roughly have been released.
Of that number?
Yeah, from the Department of Corrections, they have released 835. We were there standing by when they come out to monitor them. And of that 835, I think the recidivism rate still stands at 5%, 5.5%, which is way below the 30% recidivism rate. We still haven't had a violent offense. That's not to say, something won't happen. That's just part of the criminal justice system. Regardless of how you do supervision, whatever, again, the policymakers think, I do think you need to have a strong supervision in place when they leave, whether it's electronic monitoring, whether it's drug treatment, mental health treatment. If you don't have that supervision, the likelihood of them going back, it just goes to the roof.
Mm-hmm. While I've got you here, I wanted to ask you about, it doesn't really involve your agency because it's the Attorney General and the Department of Corrections. But the Attorney General Marshall essentially took over some of the litigation going on at the Department of Corrections by removing the Deputy Attorney General status of some of their lawyers. I think I have that right. But this is the second time this has happened from state agencies. The first time it was ethics. So I'm wondering, you oversee an agency. Are you wondering maybe if you're next or somebody else is next in terms of that DAG status being in question?
We have a good working relationship with the Attorney General's office. I would say the issue, DOC is very unique in one area in that they have a lot of outside litigation. We had, I think, over the 2.5 years I've been there, I think we had one outside contract where you contract outside of your DAGs, your Deputy Attorney Generals. So of my 5 attorneys, we rely on them pretty exclusively. We don't have outside litigation, whereas DOC is constantly in federal court on multiple issues. So I'm sure that has to be driving part of the conversation, because that's some pretty expensive litigation they're all having to deal with. And I know the Department of Corrections dreads every year having that in their budget, but maybe a question for Commissioner Ham, but I think he would agree that's a hard problem to deal with.
Oh, sure. Well, and again, we shouldn't brush over Dadeville, and I know this really isn't related to the work that you do directly, and we're still waiting for a lot of details to come out. It's painfully slow, the information coming out of here. But it does just bring up this yet again these tragedies that we see. You've seen them as an elected official, probably saw them as a congressional staffer. You now lead an agency that has jurisdiction in the criminal justice world, the realm. What's your reaction? What went through your head when you first heard?
Well, like everybody else, you go, one, you're sad. Two, it's tragic. I mean, that's just human. Forget being a director or an official. It's sad. It's very sad, and it's unnecessary. But at the same time, you got to figure out that there's going to be a lot of conversations in the day ahead of, well, what do we do to address that? Right. And there's going to be a push to, lock up this and that, or there's going to be a push to on guns. There's going to be a push to on 5 or 6 different fronts. I would just say, more important than anything else, one, there's a mourning period going on because it's such a tragedy that happened, such a tragedy occurred. But two, if you're looking to address what happened, be sure to understand the facts that the law enforcement officials there, the local, state, county officials look at and the evidence they have. If you're going to address it or try to change or somehow try to prevent something like that happening in the future, follow their lead. Because those law enforcement officials on the local level know more about this than anybody else. I mean, that's obvious from the media accounts. Y'all have all addressed it and talked about it. Let them drive the conversation as opposed to all of us. Too many times we try to drive conversation on criminal justice from right here as opposed to right here, and I think we could do more of that. But the local law enforcement folks, let's let them do their job first, and then let's decide how we should address it going forward based upon their conclusions. I think that'd be my takeaway. But at the end of the day, it's a tragedy either way. I mean, it's sad, it's senseless, particularly because it's a 16-year-old birthday party. I mean, we all have kids. You and I both have kids, and it's just something nobody wants to wake up to.
Because it was interesting. I was, just last week, the shooting happened on Saturday. Last week, I guess Monday, I talked to the district attorneys, Darrell Bailey and Barry Mattson. I talked to Senator Marika Coleman on Thursday, I guess, both about gun-related stuff. On the DAs, they were talking about penalties and new classifications of crimes that, keeping guns out of the way of previous criminals, essentially, violent criminals. Asked them about the whole red flag law situation. They had some pushback about it, but really wanted to go at the criminals. Senator Coleman had this, has this red flag bill, which, depending on the facts that come out, may not really even apply in this case. It may apply in the Nashville case, but not this one. So I guess my point is, some of these preconceived notions that we sometimes have and these narratives that we want to draw based on, you have to wait and listen to see what facts emerge.
Yeah, and the problem with criminal justice is, and I've learned this from being in the legislature and being on this side of it now, is everyone wants a simple answer to a very complex problem. Red flags. Red flags, the governor of Tennessee, when he passed that, or he just did the executive order on it, it solves a particular set of circumstances. It doesn't solve everything. Gun restrictions. It may make somebody happy on certain circumstances, but not every. Longer sentences for certain people. It does apply in certain circumstances, but not every. There's not one single solution to such a complex problem. I think, again, it goes back to me talking about let the local law enforcement do their job and then follow their lead. The problem is, too many times we want to pass one bill, one law that somehow we think just fixes everything. And criminal justice is so much more complex. Again, my side is supervising people once they're on probation or parole. That's my piece. But there's also a pretrial, there's education, there's juvenile justice. There's so many issues that need to be addressed. You can't do that in one single new law being passed. And anyone who thinks you can, they're just not following it. It's just a very complex subject.
Sure. Yeah, matter of fact, Mr. Bailey was talking about diversion programs and how important those are as opposed to, even prison time or other alternatives. We're out of time, and lots of important subjects. Really appreciate your time and coming on the show.
Thanks for having me, Todd.
All right.
Good to see you again.
We'll be right back.
You can watch past episodes of Capital Journal online anytime at Alabama Public Television's website, aptv.org. click on the Online Video tab on the main page. You can also connect with Capital Journal and link to past episodes on Capital Journal's Facebook page.
Eugene Allen Smith was a professor of chemistry and mineralogy at the University of Alabama. As state geologist, he was tasked with traveling throughout the state to document its resources. His resulting reports led to the growth of multiple industries. He also collected specimens and artifacts in the hopes of one day setting up a natural history museum. The Alabama Museum of Natural History is located in Smith Hall at the University of Alabama campus.
That's our show for tonight. Thanks for watching. We'll be back tomorrow night at 10:30 with more coverage of the Alabama Legislature right here on Alabama Public Television. For our Capital Journal team, I'm Todd Stacy. We'll see you next time.